The gate agent didn't even look up when she scanned the ticket, just mumbled, "You've been upgraded to first." Grace blinked. "Sorry, what?" "Seat 3A, ma'am. Window." It wasn't a question. She didn't ask why. Maybe the universe was finally throwing her a bone. Or maybe someone canceled. Either way, Grace wasn't about to give it back. Not with a 2-year-old on her hip, a backpack that was tearing at the seams, and exactly $6.48 left in her bank account. She kept her head down as she boarded. Didn't want to draw attention. First class always smelled like fresh coffee and expensive hand lotion. The seats were soft, wide enough to dream in. She adjusted her daughter, Riley, onto her lap. The toddler had fallen asleep just after security, her head heavy against her chest, a pacifier still clutched in one tiny hand. Then she saw him. 3B. He looked composed. Black crew neck, dark jeans, reading glasses on. Not flashy, not cold. Just still. His suitcase was small, his face, even smaller movements. But his eyes lifted when she approached. Grace gave a tight smile, silently begging him not to say anything about the baby. He didn't, just nodded once and shifted slightly to give her space. When she sat, Riley stirred and dropped her pacifier. It hit the floor with a dull thud, rolled under his seat. Grace froze. She could cry over that pacifier. It was the last clean one she had, the one Riley would wake up screaming for in 20 minutes. She glanced at him. He'd already bent down. Long fingers reached under the seat and retrieved it like it was a feather. He wiped it off on his jeans and handed it to her without looking directly at her. "Here." His voice was low, calm. She took it. "Thank you," she said softly. He just nodded again. Didn't ask questions, didn't offer polite small talk. Just leaned back and returned to the window, like he'd seen 100 flustered mothers before and didn't need an explanation. That should have been it. But about 20 minutes into the flight, as the lights dimmed and the soft hum of air filled the silence, she shifted Riley against her chest and adjusted the blanket. The baby's leg stretched out and brushed against his arm. Grace jerked back. "Sorry," she whispered, cringing. He glanced over. "She's warm." "What?" "Your daughter. She feels warm. Like a fever." Grace blinked. He wasn't smiling, wasn't judging, just observing. Like he knew exactly how to read children. Or mothers. Grace nodded slowly. "It's been coming and going. I gave her Tylenol earlier, but..." Her voice trailed. She didn't owe him an explanation. He didn't press, just leaned back and closed his eyes. But now, Grace couldn't stop looking at him. Not because he was handsome, not in the magazine way, but in the quiet, safe way. Like maybe the world didn't spin so fast when he was in the room. She didn't know it then, but he was already watching her out of the corner of his eye. Not for the way she looked, but for the way she held everything together. Her arms, her silence, the slight tremble when she thought no one noticed. An hour later, Riley began to fuss. Grace dug into her backpack. Formula container. Empty. She sighed, staring at the folded Ziploc she'd reused twice. That was all she had left. A dry packet of oatmeal, and a bottle with maybe an ounce of watered-down milk. She hadn't planned on the flight delay. Hadn't planned on anything, really, except to get to Denver, find a motel, and attend her sister's court hearing in the morning. Her sister had relapsed again, CPS was involved, and somehow they were now considering Grace for temporary guardianship of her niece. She hadn't even told her landlord she was gone. Suddenly, a movement beside her. A folded napkin landed quietly on her tray. She stared at it. On top, a Target gift card. She turned to him, her voice low and tight. "I didn't drop that." He didn't even open his eyes. Must have been turbulence. Grace stared at him. That card wasn't just generosity, it was awareness. Formula, diapers, meds. It could mean Riley eating tonight. "Well, why are you doing this?" she asked, a bit sharper than she meant to. He opened his eyes. They were light gray, clear, unapologetic. "Because I've been where you are, and no one looked my way either." She didn't know what to say to that. She felt exposed, grateful, embarrassed. So instead of crying or pushing it back, she just whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to looking out the window, the way people do when the truth is too close. What she didn't know was that he'd seen her name on the passenger list when he checked in. Grace Miller. The same name scribbled in the corner of a letter he'd found 3 years ago, folded into the back pocket of the man who pulled him out of a collapsed stairwell during a non-profit housing build in Georgia. He had never found that man again. But now her? She was sitting beside him, cradling a child, trying not to break. And Eli Grant, billionaire, CEO, and the loneliest man in a full life, was already falling in love with the strength in her silence. The wheels hit the runway just past 1:10 a.m., but Grace didn't move. Riley was still curled into her chest, burning slightly again, and all she could think about was how the cheapest motel she'd found was 7 miles from the airport, and she couldn't even afford a rideshare. Her phone had died an hour ago. No service, no charger, no plan. She stayed seated until nearly everyone had deboarded. The man from 3B, Eli, stood a few rows ahead, talking quietly to a flight attendant about a car. She figured he was long gone by the time she stepped into the empty terminal, but then... "Need a ride?" His voice came from her left. Grace turned, half startled, half braced. "I'm good," she said, instinctively, adjusting Riley on her hip. Her tone came out sharper than she intended. Eli raised both hands in a soft, "I'm not pushing" kind of way. Not trying to fix anything, just offering. "It's late. She's tired." He nodded toward Riley. "You've got enough on your back without adding a 2-mile walk." Grace looked at him. He wasn't smiling, wasn't pitying, just there, steady. And God, she was tired. "Where you headed?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Airport Budget Motel, Federal and 68th. He tilted his head. "I know it. My driver's outside." Of course he had a driver. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. He nodded once. "Okay, you think it over. I'll wait 5 minutes by the coffee kiosk. If you're there, we ride. If not, I'll head out. No pressure." And just like that, he walked off. No grand gestures, no guilt trip, just calm and quiet. Grace stared at the floor a long second. Riley let out a tiny cough against her collarbone. That sealed it. 5 minutes later, she found him exactly where he said he'd be. 2 steaming cups in hand. One black, one with a tea bag string hanging down the side. "I figured you'd want the one that doesn't taste like burnt regret," he said. She cracked a reluctant smile. They stepped into a sleek, black SUV, the kind she only ever saw parked outside luxury hotels, and the heat hit her like a hug she hadn't earned. The driver didn't say a word. Eli sat beside her, not across. Riley was already nodding off again in her arms. No one talked for a while. Then Grace spoke, softly, like if she said it too loud, it'd break something. "My sister's in jail." Eli looked over, just listening. "She got picked up again. DUI, but this time with my niece in the car. CPS called me, because there's no one else. I didn't even know if I'd say yes, but I bought the ticket anyway. Packed a bag with diapers and 2 bottles. Didn't even tell my boss." He didn't interrupt, just let her talk. "I don't know if I'm fit to take on someone else's kid. I barely keep mine dry and fed." Eli nodded once, slow. You showed up. That counts. She didn't expect that. No judgment, no advice, just acknowledgement. She let her head fall gently against the window, eyes closing for just a second. They pulled into a diner 20 minutes later, one of those old-fashioned ones with a flickering neon sign and a front door that jingled. Eli turned to her as the car idled outside. Let's get her something warm, and you something that's not airplane crackers. Grace hesitated. My treat, he said, softly but firmly. Let me do something small. Inside, the place smelled like syrup and burnt coffee, but it was warm and the booths were soft. They sat near the window. Eli ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup for her, scrambled eggs and toast for Riley, in case she woke up. He didn't ask her what she wanted. He just knew, somehow. You got kids? She asked, mid-bite. No. But you knew to order the eggs? He shrugged. My godson used to throw a fit over crusts. Grace smiled. Then, used to? Eli's jaw shifted slightly. He passed. 2 years ago. Heart condition. Grace's face softened. I'm sorry. He nodded, eyes fixed on the empty sugar packet he was tearing in half, and then again. He taught me a lot. About slowing down, about the stuff that really matters. Didn't really sink in until it was too late. Grace let the words sit. She knew grief when she heard it. Riley stirred then, just a small whimper. Grace picked her up and gently bounced her in her lap. Eli watched with quiet reverence. You're good at that, he said. At what? Balancing. She scoffed. I'm barely staying upright. Still counts. Their eyes met across the booth, something silent passing between them. Not flirtation, not romance, something slower, more honest. After they finished, Eli pulled a 20 from his wallet, placed it under the check, and stood. Grace reached for her bag. I'll get this, she said quickly. It's taken care of, he said, motioning to the bill. I didn't ask for that. I know. Then why? He paused. Because not every kindness has an angle, and sometimes it's okay to accept a soft place to land for a minute. Grace didn't have a response for that, so she didn't try. Back in the SUV, the air was quiet again. Denver lights blurred outside the window. Riley had finally settled in the car seat, a half-eaten piece of toast in her fist. Grace turned to him. You always like this? He raised an eyebrow. Like what? Unbothered, calm, like the world could fall apart and you'd just sit there with your hands folded? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. No, but I've learned to fake it. She waited, sensing there was more. He sighed, leaned his head back. I used to run a company, like my life depended on it. Every second scheduled, every headline managed. Then my mentor died. Car crash. I got his job, big title, bigger office, but none of it mattered when I sat in that hospital room with his wife and saw what was left behind. What was? An empty chair. A voicemail she played over and over just to hear his voice. Silence. I haven't worked a full week since, he said. I fund things, I build things, but I don't chase anymore. At least, I try not to. She looked at him differently now, not as a stranger with a nice voice, but a man trying to outrun his own grief. They arrived at the motel. It wasn't much, just a row of tired doors and a Coke machine that didn't work. He helped her carry Riley to the room, set her bags down, then stepped back toward the door. She watched him. You didn't have to wait, she said. I know. They stood there for a beat. She opened the door halfway. "Good night, Eli." He smiled gently. "Night, Grace." She started to close the door, but paused. Her voice dropped. "Thanks for making the hard parts feel less lonely." He looked at her then, not like a man who saw someone he wanted to fix, but like a man who saw someone he respected. "I think you're doing a lot more right than you think." The door closed softly. Grace stood behind it for a full minute, her back against the wood. She didn't cry, but she did feel something shift. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't holding up the sky all by herself. And out in the parking lot, Eli sat in the back seat of that car for a long time before asking the driver to leave. He just stared at the glowing motel sign through the window. Something about her, the way she didn't ask for help but didn't push it away either, stayed with him. He hadn't expected to care, but he already did. Grace woke up to the heat of Riley's skin pressed against her arm. At first, she thought it was just the cheap motel blankets, but then she touched her daughter's forehead, and panic hit her like a punch in the chest. Hot. Burning. Again. She sat up fast, still in her jeans, phone blinking low battery on the nightstand. Riley whimpered, weak and raspy, cheeks flushed deep red. Her breathing was uneven, short little gasps. Grace's stomach dropped. She dug through her bag. Nothing. No more meds, no more formula, one diaper, no fever reducer left. The Walgreens down the street closed at midnight. She hadn't thought to grab extras last night. She hadn't thought anything would get worse. Her hands shook. She paced the room, trying to think. Urgent care? Closed. She knew what happened when toddlers dehydrated, when fevers got too high. She'd seen it once. Her neighbor's kid had a seizure right in front of her. She remembered the way the mother screamed. Grace didn't have insurance. She didn't have time to be proud. She reached for the one thing she hadn't wanted to use, the card tucked into her bag from earlier. Eli's. She stared at it. Then, with her heart racing, she picked up her phone and called. It only rang twice. "Grace?" His voice was clear, alert, not groggy, not surprised. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice broke a little. "It's Riley. Her fever spiked. She won't keep fluids down. I don't know where to go." "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. "Send me the address. Stay with her. I'll be there in 10. She wanted to say more, to thank him, to apologize again, but he'd already hung up. He showed up in gym sweats, no jacket, hair wet like he'd just washed his face and bolted. He had a medical kit in hand, and his car idling right outside. "Let's go," he said simply, scooping Riley from her arms with ease, like it wasn't the first time he'd carried a child like that. They drove in silence at first, Grace gripping the side of the car door like she was holding her breath. At the ER, the front desk didn't even blink when Eli stepped forward. "She's with me," he said and handed over his black card. Within minutes, a nurse had Riley hooked up to fluids and fever meds. Grace sat beside her, still in her wrinkled hoodie, hands clenched in her lap like she'd forget how to breathe if she let go. Eli returned to the room with 2 cups of tea. She took it silently, their hands brushing just slightly in the exchange, that little spark. It wasn't romantic, it was grounding, the kind that reminded her she wasn't alone. "Vitals are stabilizing," he said softly, nodding toward Riley. "They'll watch her for a few hours, but she's out of danger." Grace didn't realize she was crying until he handed her a tissue. "She's all I've got," she whispered. "I know I act like I'm tough, but I don't sleep. I barely eat. I'm always scared." Eli sat down beside her, not too close to crowd her, just near enough that she felt steady again. "You don't have to explain," he said. "I've seen what it looks like to carry everything on your back. You make it look easy. But I know it's not. She turned to him, eyes red-rimmed but clear. Why are you doing all this? Really? He took a slow breath, eyes fixed on Riley. 3 years ago, I was walking through a collapsed stairwell on a housing site I was funding in Georgia. One of the beams cracked above me. I didn't even hear it. But a guy working the job site yanked me out just in time. He didn't stick around for thanks, disappeared before I could even get his name. The only thing I found in the locker room afterwards was a flannel jacket and a crumpled photo. He pulled out his wallet, opened the flap. Grace stared. It was a picture of her brother. No, she whispered. Eli nodded. That man was your brother, wasn't he? Grace covered her mouth. You knew? You knew on the plane? I had a hunch when I saw your last name, but when you said your sister was in jail and your brother had passed, something clicked. Her voice cracked. He never told us. Probably didn't think it mattered. He wasn't the kind to brag. She shook her head, a tear falling freely now. He was always doing things like that. Quietly. Didn't even tell me when he got laid off once. Just picked up night shifts until he made rent. I owe him. Not just for saving my life, but for waking me up. Grace looked at him. Really looked. This wasn't some cold tech mogul trying to make himself feel good by helping the poor girl. This was a man who knew what it meant to be cracked open and rebuilt from the inside. You didn't owe me anything, she said quietly. I didn't show up because I owed you. I stayed because you remind me of who I was supposed to be before everything got loud. They sat in silence after that. Not awkward, not forced, just quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. Later, back at the motel, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, Riley finally asleep between them. I don't let people in, she said softly. Not since her dad walked out before she was born. Not even my mom. Not even my boss. I didn't want to be anyone's problem. You're not a problem, Eli said. You're someone who makes the hard look doable. There's strength in that. But there's also exhaustion. She exhaled. I'm tired, Eli. I know. He didn't offer to stay. He didn't lean in for a kiss. He just reached for her hand, the one not clenched, and held it gently between his palms. You don't have to do this alone anymore. Not if you don't want to. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. She just let him hold it. And in that simple moment, in a dingy motel room with low light and a child sleeping in the middle of their world, something shifted. Not because it was glamorous, not because it was easy, but because it was real. He didn't rescue her. She didn't fall apart. They just let the truth finally settle between them, that there was something here, and neither of them had to run from it. It had been 3 days since Riley got out of the hospital, and things had started to feel, well, not easy, but manageable. Grace found herself waiting for Eli's texts, not because she needed him, but because his messages always arrived when she didn't expect them, and said just enough without asking for anything in return. Like the morning she opened her motel door and found a little paper bag on the handle. Inside, a breakfast burrito, a juice box for Riley, and a Post-it note that read, "You've got this. -E." She smiled like a teenager. Ridiculous, she thought, but she didn't throw the note away. By day, she walked to the county library, using their free Wi-Fi to fill out guardianship paperwork and job applications. By night, she kept one eye on Riley, the other on the front door. She didn't want to admit she was waiting, but she was. Then, one afternoon, while using the library computer, something changed. She typed Eli's name into Google, just out of curiosity. She hadn't even known his last name until he wrote it down on the ER paperwork. Eli Grant. The search results loaded like floodgates cracking open. Founder of Grant Tech. Net worth estimated at over $400 million. Multiple startups, venture capital investments, a new downtown innovation hub scheduled to open in 2 weeks. Her breath caught when she saw the announcement photo. Him standing in front of a building with glass walls and a banner that read, "The Miller Center, opening soon." Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Miller. Her last name. She clicked. Scanned. Heart racing. The new nonprofit center would support single mothers and families in transition, dedicated to the memory of Lucas Miller, a construction worker who died 3 years prior after a job site incident. Grace blinked at the screen. Her stomach flipped. He hadn't told her. He hadn't told her about the center, about the money, about any of it. It wasn't just the omission. It was the whole world he'd kept from her while sitting across from her like a man who had nothing to hide. That night, she didn't sleep. She ignored his text that read, "Want to meet for coffee tomorrow?" She ignored the knock at the door the next morning, too. When he finally found her sitting at the park behind the motel, Riley in her lap watching ducks in a runoff pond, he didn't say anything right away. He sat beside her, quiet. She didn't look at him, just said, "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" His voice was low. "Because I didn't want to change what this was." Grace turned slowly. "This? What is this, Eli? Is this your guilt project? Your redemption tour? Save the sister of the man who saved you." He flinched. "That's not fair." "No. You knew who I was from the jump. You sat next to me on that flight and never said a word. You let me believe you were just some guy who had a little money and a kind heart." "I am that guy," he said. "But yes, I should have told you. I was scared that if I did, it'd make you feel small or watched or like I was throwing power around." She looked away, trying not to cry. "You don't get it. I've spent years trying to keep my head above water, one job loss away from sleeping in my car. And you're building centers with my brother's name on the side, like that's going to fix what he went through." His jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to honor it. And yeah, maybe I was selfish not to tell you, but it wasn't because I didn't care. It's because I did. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie. Riley, sensing the tension, curled tighter into her chest. Eli ran a hand through his hair. "You want the truth? I haven't cared about a woman since college. I buried myself in business. I used success to cover grief. Your brother shook something loose in me that day, and when I saw you on that flight, I didn't want to mess it up." She didn't speak. "I wanted to just be Eli," he said, voice cracking. "Not the guy with a driver or a black card. Just a man sitting next to a woman he couldn't stop looking at." Grace stared down at the grass. "I don't need someone to save me." "I know," he replied. "And I don't need a man who feels sorry for me either." He shook his head. "Grace, I don't feel sorry for you. I admire you. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to." Silence stretched between them. She finally looked at him. Really looked at him. "What now?" she asked. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But if you'd let me, I'd like to show you what I built, what your brother inspired. No press, no ribbon cutting, just us." She nodded slowly. "One visit. That's it." 2 days later, they stood in front of the building. The Miller Center was clean and warm, with community rooms, a free clinic, a play area full of hand-me-down toys, and a wall of Post-its from women who'd already been helped. Got my first job in 2 years. Someone finally saw me. One message stood out, scribbled in messy crayon. "My mom stopped crying. That's my favorite part." Grace swallowed hard. She walked past a table of donated baby clothes, picked up a tiny blue onesie with a football on it. "You did this?" she asked softly. Eli didn't say anything, just nodded. She turned toward him. "I'm still mad," she said honestly, "but I'm also grateful." He nodded. "I'll take that." She paused, then stepped closer. "You want to know what scared me the most? Not the lies, not the money. It's that I started to believe I could count on you." "You can," he said without hesitation. Grace looked at him, at his face, his tired eyes, the way he always showed up without needing to be seen. She said, "I'm not saying I forgive you overnight, but I believe you meant it, all of it." He smiled, small and real. "That's enough for me." Riley toddled toward him then, little fingers reaching for his hand. He took it gently. Grace watched them, something in her chest finally beginning to settle. Maybe this wasn't about being rescued. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was about being chosen again and again by someone who never looked away, even when things got messy. It was a Saturday morning in early spring when Grace stood outside the small brick apartment in the Green Lake district. The air smelled like damp pavement and flowering trees. Riley was snuggled against her chest, half asleep in her hoodie, and Grace held a single key in her hand. It didn't seem like much, just a door, a lock, a number painted crookedly on wood. But for her, it was everything. Eli didn't make a speech when he handed her the lease. He just showed up at her motel door with an envelope and said, "You deserve more than temporary. 6 months, rent covered, utilities included, no strings attached." She'd been standing in the middle of the apartment for 10 minutes now. The place had hardwood floors, a tiny kitchen with a chipped counter, and the kind of light that made everything feel softer. The fridge buzzed. A folded note was taped to the door. "If something breaks, call the number below. Welcome home. E." Grace didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just stood still and let herself feel safe for the first time in a long time. That evening, Riley was down for the night, her baby monitor buzzing gently beside the couch, and Grace sat on the floor eating takeout off a paper plate. She hadn't bought furniture yet. Still figuring things out. Eli texted just after 9 p.m. "The Miller Center opens fully next week. Thought you might want to stop by." She replied, "Already planning to. Might even volunteer." He answered with a thumbs-up emoji, then added, "You up for company?" Grace hesitated, then walked to the door and flipped the porch light on. 10 minutes later, she heard the knock. Not urgent, just there, steady like him. When she opened the door, he stood with 2 mugs and a small paper bag. "Brought that tea you like, and warm banana bread from that place on 4th you said reminded you of home." She stepped back and let him in. He didn't comment on the lack of furniture, didn't try to fill the silence, just kicked off his shoes, handed her the bag, and sat across from her on the floor. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said after a minute, "about not needing to chase anymore." Eli tilted his head. "Yeah?" Grace nodded. I used to think surviving meant doing everything yourself, holding it all together. But lately, she looked toward Riley's closed bedroom door. I've started thinking maybe surviving also means letting someone stand next to you, not just behind you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's all I've wanted to do. They sat for a while, sipping tea. Then, Grace asked the question she'd been circling for weeks. What is this, really? Eli didn't flinch. Whatever you want it to be. She studied him. You're not afraid of this, getting messy? I've lived messy, but I've never had something real. I'm not walking away from that. She didn't kiss him right then. She just leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stayed like that until the apartment was completely quiet. A week later, Grace walked through the doors of the Miller Center, not as a visitor, but as the community program coordinator. Eli hadn't offered her the role out of charity. He waited until she asked to be part of it. When she did, he didn't hesitate. She built workshops, helped other single parents find housing, created a donation closet with dignity, not pity. And every time she walked past the photo of Lucas on the lobby wall, she whispered, "We're good now, big brother." It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy. But over time, Eli became a fixture, not in her life, but in their lives. He learned how Riley liked her pancakes cut. He picked her up from daycare when Grace had late meetings. He showed up to court when Grace got temporary custody of her niece. He didn't propose. Not yet. But one night, while watching a movie with Riley asleep between them, he looked at Grace and said quietly, "Can we build something? Not overnight, just brick by brick, us." She didn't even think. She just smiled and whispered back, "We already are." And that was the thing about love. It didn't arrive with music and fireworks. It came in the form of two people who kept showing up. A man who didn't need to be needed, but stayed because he wanted to. And a woman who learned that strength didn't mean standing alone. In the middle of quiet rooms, banana bread, and baby giggles, they found their version of home. Not rescued, not indebted, just real. And that was everything. Love doesn't always show up with roses and grand gestures. It often begins in the quiet moments, in a shared glance, a helping hand, or the simple choice to stay when it's easier to walk away. This story reminds us that true love sees beyond circumstances, that vulnerability is not weakness, and that sometimes the people who change our lives forever come when we least expect them. Grace and Eli's journey proves that hearts connect not through perfection, but through presence. When we stop hiding, when we let someone in, and when love becomes less about rescuing and more about walking through life together, side by side. As they built their life brick by brick, they reminded us that destiny may open the door, but commitment is what makes a home. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever experienced a love that surprised you? A moment that felt like fate? Don't forget to click like and subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable, soul-deep love story. And wherever you are tonight, may love find you gently, honestly, and just when you're ready to believe in it again.